action, and welcome everybody. This is PnP Weekly episode 206. It is 17th of April, 2023. Well, we're recording the intro and the articles on 17th. We actually recorded the interview a few days before on the previous week, but that could happen. No, they noticed the change of clothes and all of that stuff. You know, I don't wear the same clothes every single day. You probably don't.
You don't? I've got 10 the same shirts, so
yeah, exactly. Anyway, on the PnP Weekly, I always talk about the latest in Microsoft 365
and what we wear,
and articles, and what we wear, and the weather, and anyway, and we always have a visitor, and then we go through the weekly articles from Microsoft and Community. This time, the visitor is
Mr. Spencer Harbar.
Yes, Spence has been an MVP for like 3 decades. No, just kidding. For a long time. And been around within the community since early. I don't even know when. But anyway,
thousands, I guess.
2000s. Yeah, there. That's true. That is true. And of course nowadays focus is more on Microsoft 365 and the consulting on that side, and it's also closely involved on coordinating and creating and delivering the European Collaboration Summit, which is happening on 20th to 24th of May.
22 to 24, right?
22 to 24 of May. Yes, that might be the case. Sure, whatever you say, whatever. My name is Vesa Juvonen. I'm a product manager in Microsoft 365 platform areas, and with me as a co-host is.
Hey everybody, my name is Waldek Mastykarz and I am Cloud Developer Advocate for Microsoft 365 at Microsoft.
Excellent. Let's jump actually directly into the interview with Spence, and then we'll come back for the articles. Excellent. So welcome, Spencer Harbar. I do not know actually what is your current company, so I'm not going to actually try to explain that. You'll do the intros. Spence, you've been on a show last time. We just double-checked that on December 2020. So it's actually been quite a long time since that, and quite a few episodes as well in between. But you're still active in the community. You're organizing events and all of that stuff. But let's not me try to explain what you do. So let's turn it back to you. So who are you? What do you do?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show again. It was a long time ago in COVID standard time, I guess. So all sort of merges into one big chunk, I guess. I mean, in terms of what I'm doing, I'm basically working for ECS Events at the moment. They're the company that is responsible for organizing a couple of big conferences in Europe and helping out other community activities in terms of in-person events. In the day job, if you will, I still basically work for myself, and I do from time to time consulting, usually for the larger corporations in the Azure and Microsoft 365 space. It's a very sort of interesting time at the moment because the industry sort of is going through these peaks and troughs, and I don't just do one thing. You know, I used to be known years ago, of course, for being a SharePoint person, which was even then sort of not entirely accurate. I did other stuff as well. And things have sort of come back a bit full circle there. I spent, if you think that in the time since the last time we chatted, I've probably spent half of my time doing consulting around deployment for software as a service type solutions. So, you know, automation, quality assurance, and so on. Also quite a bit of security and compliance of late. Seems to have become even more of a sort of popular, if you will, activity. And then recently, particularly since, I won't say the end of the pandemic, but since we sort of got back to work effectively, there's been a significant uptake in those kind of customers needing more help with adoption, rollout of some of the new capabilities that perhaps the pandemic sort of forced their hand a little bit with. You know, they were maybe thinking about it or hedging their bets, and now, you know, with a big increase in working from home, particularly for sort of divisional offices and things like that, there is a much more sort of much more demand for that side of things, which is interesting because, 3 or 4 years ago, I was doing none of that stuff at all. I hadn't really, I'm using obviously Office 365 daily, and I stay as much up to date with the technology as I can, but not really doing any real work on it until, towards the sort of the return to normal, if we want to call it that. Doesn't feel very normal, of course, but a lot of companies,
it's different, but a
lot of companies struggling with working from home, in a general sense. Even if they were doing it before, that it's for a lot more people now, and they're beginning to learn the pros and cons, and so that's quite a large chunk of it.
The one thing that I wanted to ask you about, though, is like way back when you had this one article, or was it series of articles?
Wait.
Taking you back, way back.
Yes, that's very much applicable.
Back.
You had series of article around taming, if you will, the user profile service.
Mm-hmm.
Is that still used a lot, and have you done any work around that anytime lately, or is it like that's way back when? It's still
I can answer on the first question, of course, from the cloud perspective, and the answer is yes, it is used enormously.
Yeah, that was all very interesting situation. Actually, came out of another conference. I'd done a lot of work with a thing called Identity Manager prior to SharePoint being sort of using a cut down version of it. But yeah, the first question is does that still get used? I presume so. It's not something, I don't check the statistics very often, but I know, I get the 6 monthly stats on email, and it's still, by far and away one of the most read. I get quite a few email questions about it still, which is weird,
There's a lot of on-premises use it still, and subscription edition and all of that, so it does exist. So
and the technology behind it is still used, for everybody's tenant. So that's still, I still get pinged quite a lot on that in the background, But yeah, I can't really answer the questions because I don't remember that stuff. I have to kind of go back and look it up and think, oh yeah, I vaguely remember something about this, and so on.
Isn't that precisely why we blog?
That's why we
videos.
We used to.
Exactly.
We used to blog, right?
True.
When was the last time you put something on your blog?
Yeah, indeed, that's something I've been very bad at. I keep intending to write again, but it's difficult because the level that I would like to do it to, it's a lot of work. You need people to review it and blah blah blah. And of course, the trend now is very much for videos for everything. In fact, the last thing I did, which was directly related to that, was would have been the last big conference before the pandemic. I showed people how to use Azure AD to sign into on-prem SharePoint and do the profile sync and have everything work. Not a particularly difficult thing, but as usual with SharePoint, there's a few little extra steps that if you miss out, everything kind of goes haywire. Particularly around the images, the profile pictures. And so that I ended up basically doing, instead of writing it up, I just basically recorded the session and stuck that on YouTube. And that I still get people asking me for the PowerShell for, which is quite amusing. It's not every day, but there's, it shows that enough people, as Vesa mentioned, are still on-prem, which has actually been a bit of a cascade of questions the last few weeks with the 2013 release coming out of support has prompted people to, go, oh, blimey, we need to do something. So yeah, to still get questions on that. I also get a lot of questions on Workflow Manager and a few of the other sort of more esoteric aspects of the old SharePoint. Every so often, like once every 6 months, you'll get an email from somebody who wants to do distributed cache or something like that, right?
Now, we are recording this on Friday, 14th of April, and I'll explain in a second why I'm calling that out, because on Monday, 16th, no, that's 17th of April, hopefully I'm not spilling the beans and we'll cancel this, but we can actually publicly deprecate workflow, 2013 workflow from cloud. So from SharePoint Online. Deprecation doesn't mean that it's going to go immediately away and we cut it. No, not at all. So deprecation means that we'll basically say we're no longer investing on this technology. It's fully supported. If there's issues, we can jump in and fix it. But it will have announced life cycle, and we're looking into shutting it down. And people should be moving away from workflow. But coming back on your workflow comment there, it's actually kind of interesting to think about it. That the workflow, which is still widely used, was part of the SharePoint 2013. And now SharePoint 2013 is an end of life. And it doesn't have the same relationship in a cloud, of course, because cloud is different. It's way more modern and modernized, but still there is a certain level of an association. The baseline implementation was done back in 2010 or something like that for 2013. So it's interesting how the time loses its meaning in some of this stuff, because it's clearly well implemented stuff still being used.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I come across more to the sort of speaking to the mid-market customer, I guess you would call it, where they've got an on-prem environment and they're committed to moving to, or migrating, I should say, to the cloud. But they don't always know what they've got there. They know they've got a bunch of sites and libraries and documents and whatnot and so forth. But it's not until they actually start doing it they realize, oh yeah, there's that one form that isn't very complicated but is really important, and it's it was built by somebody who long since left the organization and all those kind of things, and it works. And you've got to basically get them away from that older technology, legacy technology that's not going to work in the cloud or will go away, and also convince them to spend some money on re-implementing it, not changing the logic, but re-implementing it in the new stack, and that can be quite interesting. Classic consulting, it doesn't really matter what the technology is. I mean, you need to know about it, but they're hiring you because you know that stuff. And it's more about convincing them how to go about it and how not to waste too much money doing it as well, which is, especially if it's what we now call a low-code solution, built by a business analyst or something like that. Usually the logic is not documented. And so, that's quite, I don't do too much of that, but it does crop up quite a lot with some of the smaller customers,
Another thing that I want to ask you, because you mentioned that you work a lot with enterprise size orgs, right? How do they, with the current pace of change and the trends really to be, let's jump from one thing to another and there is new shiny thing, let's try that. How do they cope with that? And what are their strategies to try to maximize the revenue on their investments in the cloud and benefit from the latest investments versus trying to understand that and build those practices, how to use it effectively at scale?
Yeah, it's a very broad range of approaches and sort of what you might call maturity, right? If you think about the concept, or think broadly about the concept of how, cloud adoption maturity within the enterprise will vary greatly. A lot of my traditional customers that I've been working with for donkey's years are actually quite far forward with that. They've had center of excellences before, they've gone through similar transitions before, even if it was all on-prem before, they've gone from, product X, they've moved from that to SharePoint. That was a big transition for them. They've moved into the idea of composite business applications, connecting to, legacy data sources and things like that. So that, some of those organizations are actually pretty competent at measuring their success and their, where they choose to invest, and also how cynical perhaps they might be about believing the latest, the new bells and whistles. Of course, at the moment, the classic example of that is the Power Platform, right? Very powerful, and
it's in the name.
Offers
it's in the name.
Yeah, so offers an incredible range of opportunity.
True.
But at the same time, if you go into it sort of feet first without really thinking it through, you're going to end up with a lot of the problems that you used to have with the previous approach. So some of the enterprises are a little more cynical than others. Now, there will also be enterprises who are a lot less mature. So, for example, a few, I'm not going to name names, but a few of the large banks only just started moving to Office 365, basically the year before the pandemic. So they haven't really had a massive paradigm shift. They've had IT shifts, but moving from, tin and metal to virtualization is not really a paradigm shift. Moving from on-prem, bunch of guys usually guys looking after servers and patching, or not, as the case may be, to a software as a service is, a huge thing. And so for those, they still struggle with it. And generally speaking, as an industry, we are getting better, but we still don't give enough support in those areas for the bigger customers. I think particularly banks, military contractors, government organisations. I mean, think about the UK with all the changes in legislation and everything that's been in the last 4 or 5 years. Most of those projects don't happen because there's this, there's like an air gap between what the policy intent should deliver, some kind of electronic citizenship, and the understanding of the people making the decisions. There's an air gap there, and the industry doesn't really fill that gap. And it's not the vendors' fault. The vendors are doing actually most of the good work here in terms of promoting skills, knowledge, etc. It's really the consulting side of it where it's kind of a bit of a fail, because most of those organizations are geared up to support the old way of doing things, and they need to make the transition as well. And there's an age barrier. I mean, we shouldn't overlook that a lot of people in IT will have taken early retirement in the last 5 years. So there's a gap there as well in terms of experience. The skills is one thing, but it's, for a big company to make a big shift, particularly in a line of business processing scenario where, serious money is involved, that's a long battle, and it's going to take, a good 2 or 3 years to implement. Again, sort of reversing it back to the people who are much more mature, they're actually going hell for leather with it. They're doing really well because they've already gone through it once or 1.5 times. Right. They're much more agile, and they can say, oh, well, yes, this is new features come available to us in Power BI. Okay, because we've got a solid platform, we can actually do that relatively quickly, be not that concerned if we don't get it perfect the first time, which is the other big benefit of the cloud, right? You can iterate. And they can power ahead, and that gives them competitive advantage. Another good example is the way the fintech industry has adopted, distributed ledger. Well, the people who were successful with that were all the people who had, got their sort of foundation correct, if you will, previously. And the people who've struggled with it are the ones who, are like, whoa, what's Bitcoin? And they've got to get over that hurdle. So it's a mixed bag. But I'm pleasantly surprised by most of my traditional customers. And it's nothing to do with me. It just so happens that I've known these companies for far too long, actually. That they're on their way, particularly with the productivity stuff. But one thing that gets in the way of everybody is nervousness around security and compliance, because that was something that used to be able to be put in the we'll do it later pile. Now that's no longer appropriate, right? If you're an airline or an oil company and you get slammed by some information disclosure, or indeed a ransomware, you can't, you don't have a leg to stand on. You can't say, oh, well, we were going to do that, but we didn't get around to it. So that's the thing that's putting the brakes on things a little bit at the moment, at least from my perspective.
But even on that one, the cloud helps, because some of the key functionalities like identity management can be considered to be outsourced in certain level for the provider. So therefore, you could argue that it's actually safer rather than every single company, all up at least on average, it's safer than individual companies basically investing to their own specialist and all of that. So
Yeah, very true. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind, or really in any serious security consultant's mind, that the cloud is far more secure because of that. You know, you're making a trust decision. You're outsourcing effectively not the risk management, but the outsourcing the implementation of the solution to, you know, Microsoft, Amazon, whoever. And it's also another interesting cycle, right? I mean, Azure now offers basically, as part of the core platform, automated web application vulnerability assessments. So if you turn that stuff on and you pay attention to it, you've immediately got a much stronger security baseline than you ever would have had with on-prem. I mean, I used to, before I did SharePoint, I worked for a security consultancy, and we were trying to sell web, you know, the OWASP testing. And this was in 2001, 2002, when OWASP was first, you know, a thing. And it was, you know, testing for all the usual things, SQL injection, cross-site scripting, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
Those vulnerabilities are still as important today as they were then. But, you know, platforms like Azure actually give you the ability to do that stuff and threat modeling, which before would all need to basically be manual or with some very expensive third-party software. You know, and also we know that the vendors use that type of rigor in the creation of their own software as a service. You know, so we can have confidence that if we're running stuff on Azure, that there's a certain level of sort of inbuilt trust and solid security foundation. And the same would be true for people who build software as a service on Azure. You know, it's one of the reasons to pick it, right? I mean, if you're going to do an application and you've got the choice, you know, what should our platform be? It's going to be what the dev capabilities are, what do our people know, and what's our baseline of the old-fashioned security, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And the amount of stuff that Azure is now delivering in the security space is amazing. You know, if you put a dollar cost on what that would have cost for you to implement for your SharePoint on-prem farm back in 10 years ago, I mean, the project would never happen, right?
Let's start with building the expertise and knowledge to even understand the scope, not to mention actually implementing that.
And that's actually a really good kind of a reference on something which you said earlier, Spence, related on SharePoint deployments wasn't never about the SharePoint. It was actually about all of the other things as well, and Active Directory, which we still have. Now it's called Azure Active Directory. It was about the SQL, which we still have. It's SQL Azure. So, and optimizing those things rather than the classic example of, hey, you're an MCM for SharePoint, so you can upload a document in document library. Well, it's a bit more complicated than that. But still, luckily, evolution moves forward and technology evolves, and the abstraction layers come in, and that changes, of course, the work what we do. But based on the discussion what we just had, a really good example that the consulting still exists, and there's still opportunities for consulting. It has just evolved to a different, let's say, abstraction layer again within the past decade. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it used to be quite common, particularly in the Microsoft space, that the traditional sort of IT pro would be worried that they wouldn't have any work. You know, well, I think whilst that was a reasonable concern to have, we've proven categorically that there's even more work now, and that work is more value, it's more higher value, right? It's not fiddling around creating DNS entries and making a mess of it, or it's not renewing an SSL certificate and making a mess of it.
Although
updating hosts files
pretty often too.
And it's more
fixing stuff in a host file mapping in the TCP or whatever has. Or the what was the TCP pipe system? What was it? The classic thing which killed me so many times was it TCP pipe, which basically was a security thing which you're trying to request in, but you needed to go to the registry. Loopback. loopback check.
Yeah.
Jeez. But anyway, those who know, they know. It's
those who don't, they have no idea.
And it's good. They don't have to.
There is no videos on TikTok to explain that.
Yet. Don't give anybody any ideas.
Yeah.
Now let's talk a bit about back on your day job. We talked about the organization who coordinates the European Collaboration Summit. What's the special thing about European Collaboration Summit? Like, I wouldn't know, but so.
Yeah, well, there's
why would people need to go there in May? What is this?
Yeah, quite a few special elements of the event that's coming up in towards the end of May, 22nd to 24th of May in Düsseldorf. Basically, this is Europe's largest community event in the Microsoft 365 Teams space. And this year we're celebrating the 10th edition, so it'll be the 10th show. It wasn't always called European Collaboration Summit. Originally, it was the SharePoint and Project Conference Adriatics. I hope I'm getting that right. If I don't,
I think it is. Yeah,
kill me. But it was something like that in Zagreb, and then it moved to Germany, and became the European Collab Summit. And so it's going to be our 10th year. So we're going to do all the things that we normally do: great content, great speakers, tutorials, basically the best networking available in Europe in a large event, multi-day event, but also throw in a few surprises to celebrate the 10 years with the community. I think that's the key differentiator, if you want to put it that way, of our event. Is it's very much a community event. We make a great effort to always have, a group of people speaking for the first time that might not have done a large event before, and kind of help them along with that, and put a real focus on the networking activities in the expo hall, along with a lot of sponsors who have been with us for 10 years as well as speakers, and we also keep the ticket price at a level
quite reasonable
that is accessible. I mean, and it's a difficult balancing act, particularly since the pandemic. Everything's got more expensive. Obviously in Europe we're suffering with high inflation, etc., but nonetheless we still maintain that it's better to have it be reasonably priced to enable people to come, travel restrictions notwithstanding. And we have a community vibe. There'll be quite a few surprises for the 10th anniversary birthday that we won't announce because they're surprises, but a few little extra bits of fun that we haven't done before, that we're busy in the background trying to get all together in time for next month. Great content, as I said. We think we've got a good balance between big names, brand new speakers, and community people, including quite a lot of people coming from Microsoft. Good topic mix, Teams, Viva, SharePoint, M365, security. The event content has changed over the years. That's one of the things that's followed the industry from being kind of what you might describe as pretty deep technically for a conference to be now a bit more sort of wide. We've got a lot of Power Platform material this year, as well as some IT Pro stuff. We even have a SharePoint Server subscription edition tutorial for our, for those customers who are still in that space. So pretty broad, but kind of a little bit less technical than perhaps it would have been 5 or 6 years ago.
I think that's a general term, let's say, direction with the conferences as well. And it's not that it's marketing, but it's not necessarily like, okay, so in this session, I will configure you this thing. Rather, it's more on what does it actually mean? What is the value out of it? And yes. Yeah.
I mean, the conference itself does have more or less a 50-50 mix between what you would maybe describe as sort of technical people who are only interested in the how does it work and all the rest of it, and then sort of the business decision maker being the other 50%.
Yeah.
And so, by definition, the content needs to be, explaining what these new things are, what they're useful for, what they're not so good for, what the value is, that side of thing, more than just, as you say, how to configure something or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah, we also have another conference, which is actually in December, which is the European Cloud Summit. And that one's a bit more technical because that's more about Azure and those kind of things. So that's our sister event, if you will.
Now, from a timing perspective, how does people know more about the European Collaboration Summit, where they absolutely should come? Because again, reasonable prices, awesome speakers, a lot of cool stuff. Where do you find more information?
So the best place to go to is www.collabsummit.eu. That'll take you to the main website, which has got you can buy the ticket there, €450 at the moment. And, you've got all the agenda and all this information there on how to get there, where it is and so on. It's in a very nice venue in Düsseldorf, all very fancy. And all the information is on that website. You can obviously also find us as Collab Summit on Twitter, and there's a Facebook community as well. Just type European Collaboration Summit community and you will find that there.
Cool. I guess this is it then for now, right, Waldek? Any thoughts on your side?
Almost weekend. It's
your microphone
as we're
is
recording that. It's 4:30 p.m. So it's almost weekend. No more thoughts at this moment.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
Not enough.
Now, I guess that sums up the thing for now then. Thank you, Spence. Thank you for joining. Good to catch up. Good to actually see you in person pretty soon as well. So it's been a while again.
Wow,
so...
yeah. Like for me, I think it was at least 3-4 years, maybe even more.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me on, guys. And yeah, as you say, I'm very much looking forward to being together again. That's probably one of the best things about the event from my perspective. It's a lot of work, but it's great to see all of the usual suspects and some new people as well.
Yep, absolutely.
Definitely.
And anybody who's watching, please join us. Absolutely.
See you in Düsseldorf.
See you in Düsseldorf, absolutely. But cool. After this, we'll jump on the recording the articles. I would like to be clear within the podcast and video show. So let's move there with Waldek.
Great.
Thank you, Spence.
Cheers, guys. Bye.
Excellent. Thank you, Spence, for the interview. Really cool to catch up and looking forward to actually seeing you in person in Düsseldorf in late May for sure. So I guess that's where we will be. Well, you will be there as well, Waldek, right?
Yeah, it's going to be my first event since 3 years, 4 years. I don't know. Time flies. I haven't seen everybody in person for a long time.
Yeah, and this week, as we're recording this, it is also MVP Summit week. So MVPs are basically our under NDA, get to know things, and some of the MVPs are flying over to Seattle and. Yeah, it feels so bad to watch that.
Oh yeah.
FOMO. So
yeah, I've got great like seeing everybody now, like being in the Space Needle, Bellevue Mall, just walking down to like good memories.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I had a chance to attend a few of these in the past, and while I haven't been MVP for 2.5 years now, it's still, friendships that I've made with folks over the years, people I met. Is like these are friends for life, basically.
Absolutely. Well, I've never been an MVP, so.
Yeah, you've been always on the other side. So.
Always.
Yes. Like you've never done anything else, right? Like
That's
even
true.
When you were 5, you were,
No.
Oh, you're getting all emotional now. It's not me. It's just dust.
Yes. It's just allergies and pollen. Anyway, so let's jump on the weekly articles. Let's jump on the weekly articles and then wrap up. There we go. So Mondays are so hard. So let me share my screen. Okay, let's start with the articles from Microsoft side. In the SharePoint blog, we had a request external files into a SharePoint document libraries. Sounds a bit strange, but it actually makes a lot of sense when you start actually looking into the details and capabilities. So basic idea here is that you are sending a link to your partners or customers or somebody to actually submit or upload their files to a specific location. And they will not see the other files in that location. So it's basically requesting files, requesting an upload to a specific set of location. Functionality itself has existed already in OneDrive in the past, but now it's actually getting rolled out also to SharePoint, which makes a lot of sense because you can think about extranet scenarios, or you can think about projects.
Project teams, yeah, definitely. So this is really cool.
Yep, absolutely. And Mark Cashman has a great video related on this one. It's actually been watched quite a lot already within a week, and it really shows the functionality, the introductions, and of course shows one by one how does it actually work in practice. So really cool. Good job. Awesome.
Mark 9 project team right there on the screen. So does that mean that we've got 9 marks? Is that how Mark gets to do so much?
That's how he scales. That's true. Yes, that's his scalability pattern. So sorry, spilling the beans. Now let's then move in here on the Microsoft 365 platform blog. Alexis Ginzelin had a nice blog post around deploy your ChatGPT-based model securely using Microsoft Teams, Power Virtual Agent, and Azure OpenAI. So basically combining those 3 to a functioning solution, and he walks through the different scenarios, what do we need to do in configurations, and then basically have a bot which you can interact with within Teams. Really cool stuff. So awesome technology demo. Then we had enabling billing for Microsoft Teams APIs in Microsoft Graph. Ooh, that sounds interesting. Doesn't it?
Exactly. So on Microsoft Graph, there are some APIs, and in this case, we're talking about the APIs for Microsoft Teams that are paid, right? So in order to use those APIs, you need to have additional license. And this article goes into depth about like how do you enable that, what do you need to have in place, how do you estimate the cost, and so forth and so on. So if you look into the ability to use these APIs in the apps in apps that you build, definitely check out this article because it will answer most common questions that you might have on the topic.
Yeah, and just to call out also the fact that that this doesn't mean that all of the Graph APIs would be paid at some point. Not at all. That's not the intention here. But high cost or how would I put it? APIs which are touching a lot of data might actually have a cost associated to them. And that's kind of the direction where we're heading in the future. So, but baseline functionalities, what you can do in UX and as a UI clicking through things, those are all intended to be, of course, available without a cost. So now in here, Kelly Bowen McCombs had a blog post update related on Microsoft 365 developer program, just a updates on the renewal model. And this is the great program where you can get a free Microsoft 365 tenant, which automatically renews in every single 90 days, as long as you're using it for a developer usage. And there has been some adjustments and how it actually works in the past. Now, there was also a blog post from Marcel Ferrari around create a custom connector for your web API from within Visual Studio. What?
This is really cool, right? So imagine that you are LB or you are enterprise and you have a custom API to do things. You can now really easily build a connector for Power Platform for your API so that your Power Apps and Power Automate flows that you build can connect easily to that API, as opposed to having, manually build HTTP requests, parse responses, and all that. Like, you don't need to do any of that. You can build a connector that will kind of expose the data shape to Power Apps and Power Automate flows and allow users to really easily tap into anything that API can do. So this is a really great way, and especially the fact that we can do it so easily, because we could build the connectors in the past, but it was so much more complex. And here now, like if you are a dev and you already built the API, why not immediately offer the connector too, just to make it really easily to use the API across the org?
Absolutely.
So this is really great.
Really cool stuff, and great that we're investing on making these things even easier in the future. There's a huge amount of connectors already available, but of course, if it's an enterprise API, it's your own custom
not
API.
In a store, right?
It's not in a store, so absolutely. Now, on the PnP blog, there was a nice blog post from Louis Fries related on Teams Toolkit Cloud Skills Challenge, which is a program initiative running from April 12th to April 26th, so 2 weeks. And basically here get to learn to use and build stuff using the Microsoft Teams Toolkit. And a lot of other people are actually involved in this and helping you to get started as well. So really, really cool. Then there was a blog post from Dan Toft dealing with the 5K item limit in SharePoint APIs. What is the 5K item limit?
Exactly, right? So way back when already, we had this limit where you would be able to show at most 5,000 items in a list. Why? Because showing more is, one, doesn't make any sense, and two, it's just painfully slow because it's a lot of data to put on a single screen. So with that, there are multiple ways to go about, like, how do you page data? How do you ensure that the data is retrieved in chunks and so forth and so on? And there are a lot of different approaches you can take to stay under the limit and basically build apps that perform well. And that, in his article, touches on a few things that you can do, specifically around building views. Like, how can you organize views so that these views will not exceed the limit?
5K limit. Historical thing. I remember with my career before Microsoft writing code for one invoice automation software, and we created this HTML whatever picker as a pop-up. At that point, pop-ups were kind of fine to use. And as we loaded dynamically the data in database, we never actually considered until after a while that what is the page load and page size, because we basically whenever there was actually thousands of items in a database, we loaded them all, and then we only showed a one page and another page. But when I clicked the next, it was super fast. However, you can only imagine the impact. The first load and the page size grew to be like megabytes and megabytes and megabytes because it was dynamic HTML.
After the app was deployed to production and you moved on to another project.
Unfortunately, quite often, yes, happens. So
unfortunately, right?
Yes, the scale. Always test for scale. Yeah. Anyway, but it's a good example of why would you need to show more than 5,000 items in a single view? That's impossible. But the human mind would be like, what?
Well, because then you can build a chart that aggregates all of them client side. No,
don't do that. No. Now, Alex McLaughlin had a blog post automatically generate flow, workflow, and business rule documentation. So basically, really cool scenario on automatic file documentation creation based on automatically using the Power Automate and Flow and all of that stuff. A lot of cool stuff actually.
Wow,
and then
using
a
lot of XML there in there to parse and
XSLT, XML, and then you are able to output basically the documentation automatically, which is really, really cool. Awesome stuff. Absolutely brilliant, and thank you for sharing, Alex, on that one. We also had a blog post from Sohail Bhalla around Connect Power Virtual Agent TeamSpot with Azure DevOps. A lot of fancy words. What does that mean?
Exactly. So imagine that you want to build a simple bot for Teams, right? Using PVA, and you want that bot to do something in DevOps. So maybe react to item changes, react to builds, trigger builds, any kind of work that you might want to do in DevOps. This is how you would approach it. So this is a great example of a simple bot that probably doesn't involve any code, depending how do you think about code, right? But it doesn't require you to, for example, program in C#, use the bot framework and all of that, right? Instead, you can more easily set things up. And for many things, maybe especially around like you personally being or trying to work more efficiently, or maybe even within your team, right? Building something for your team only, that might be good enough.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you for that. Then we had an update on CLI for Microsoft 365 6.6 version. What's new?
Yeah, so it was a release that is really small. The main thing is that we released support for SPFX 117.1, which we released a few days before that. So that was probably the biggest change. And another cool thing that we've done, we've worked with the Mendable team, which is a SaaS service that allows you to infuse AI over your docs. So all these chat GPT like abilities. So now when you go to our docs in CLI, you will be able to ask chatbot, how do I do X? What do I need? So as opposed to you having to know the names of a command or something, you can ask AI to give you answer, to give you more idea about what is it that you need. So we're really excited about that. And we cannot wait to hear, how does it work? Does that work? Where can we improve? So it's really, really cool thing that we added to our docs. And we're working also on the ability to bring that to terminal. So even in command line, you will still be able to say, hey, can I do X with CLI? And I don't even know how. I don't know if there's a command even for that. So I just want to ask, as opposed to having to go to our docs and browse through all of them, because it's a lot and we keep adding things. So as the docs grow, it's harder and harder to find the right thing. So we hope that AI will be that ability that makes it easier for folks to find out and to learn about what we have to offer.
Yep, that's a really cool scenario. We should actually have a look on how do we do this for the other projects as well, because it would actually help people to find the documentation. Like thinking, of course, PnP PowerShell is a great example on where this would be super useful.
Like imagine that we could do that PnP all up.
True, that as well. Yes,
all tooling. Like I don't even know that there is PowerShell or community.
Yeah, I don't even know how to exactly.
How
That's
do
true.
I with everything that we expose? How do I do X?
That's true. That is true. That's actually really, really cool. Then we had a blog post from Rashmi Auklu on deploying and installing SharePoint framework solutions using PnP PowerShell, the hub site and associated sites, and basically on automation to make that deployment to happen specifically to a subset of sites rather than doing that in a tenant level. There's advantages and disadvantages and scenarios for both of them. And then the PowerShell is basically scanning through all of the individual sites within a hub site and then associating the application to them. So really, really cool as well. Thank you, Rashmi, on that one. We also had a new blog post from Marcus Miller. Marcus has been really, really, really active on configure Teams application with Azure App Configuration. So basically, Azure App Configuration dynamically configuring Teams application. Good way of saying that?
Yes, which is basically
exactly the same.
The words in the title. Yeah. So basically, in Azure, you have the ability to decouple the config of your app from the actual code, right? And how you can use that ability to store all kinds of keywords and config settings and URLs that you've got separately from the app, and then bring it to your app. So how to use these two into one. So this is a really great scenario or a great way to show how to make use of the latest abilities that we expose on Azure in your Teams apps.
Absolutely. Really, really cool stuff. Thank you, Marcus, on that one. Now, there was also a blog post from Kasper Larsen. Kasper, you're still missing your name from your blog, and you're missing your name from the YouTube channel as well. It would be good to have it in there, because if somebody finds something cool what you've done, they don't know who you are. Now, but on this one, new videos on YouTube, useful tools when working with search, and basically talking about the different tools, and he is releasing newer videos upcoming as well. So right now, the latest video is using the SP editor. SP editor is something what Tommy Tavela has actually done an extension for Chrome and for Edge, which actually increases the productivity of the developers. So, and how that can be used. And Kasper is showing how that can be used then for the benefit of search troubleshooting. Now, we also had a blog post from Mikael Mallet around PnP PowerShell. A lot of PnP PowerShell. Why is everybody doing scripting? What's with that?
Well, for one, it's a very efficient way to of things that you want to do one, but you want to do them in a repeatable way, so that in production you don't need to build a document that you need to like walk through and write down every step. Like, no, just run the script. I run it. It works. Run it here, and then people can test it and rerun it in production, and not to like, now I need to follow the same 10 pages of steps. Like, So makes perfect sense.
Now, in PnP PowerShell officially is not supported anymore for on-prem. But what Michael is showing here how to use or how to overcome that setting by using clever way of using CSAM, client-side object model, on stating the context, and voila, it actually does work in on-premises. So why isn't it supported for on-premises? It's simply a resourcing challenge to keep on expanding and growing and all of that stuff. So, and limiting challenge as well, because a lot of the scenarios are not actually available within on-prem. Now, Marcin from Staffbase explicitly called me out related on this blog post. Basically,
I'm doing this thing that I'm not allowed to do.
Yes, exactly. So we're doing this thing which is not supported. So, but how cool is that? But basically, Marcin and they've been really working on optimizing performance on handling things, and then basically he's calling out here an alternative ways of doing authentication and token handling. However, they're using an internal namespace, and this is obviously not intended to be used by a third party. But we cannot block usage of these APIs because it's impossible to do that from third parties. So if somebody would be doing this, it's on their own responsibility. So we cannot help and resolve issues and potential issues related to that. And by the way, some of these APIs might go away as well. Now, will they? Different discussion. But again, if it's not intended for third party, we can change that anytime. Now, Daryl and Daniel had a latest message in their show on collaborative meeting notes and intelligent recap. Oh, that's actually the most, let's say, fancy title of the announcements with Stable Culture. There's other announcements within the last week as well. So a lot of cool stuff again. Great podcast to listen. Now, a lot of SPFX stuff as well. Xiao, Livia, Xiao, huh? See,
you're getting better at this. Only took you 4 years, but hey, you're improving.
Yes. Had a blog post on building a timeline component with SPFX SharePoint framework. That's actually really cool looking application, which he has actually created using then SPFX, PnP, JS, and all of that. And of course, that works in SharePoint or in Teams or in Outlook or in Office 365 as well. This case scenario is actually showing that in Teams. Really cool stuff as well, and referencing some of the helper videos which he has actually used. So really cool. Thank you for sharing. And then Kunchi Sangani had a really cool blog post.
Exactly, about extending Microsoft Graph Developer Proxy using custom plugins, right? So Microsoft Graph Developer Proxy is a tool that you can use to simulate some of the elusive errors on APIs, like rate limiting, throttling, and it goes beyond just mocks, right? Because like with mocks, what you get is when you call an API, you always get back the same mock. Whereas here, you can simulate actually the things like, well, the error might be there or might not be there. And when you have a rate limiting, can you actually stay under the limit? And so there are quite a few things that you can do in a really easy way with the Microsoft Graph Developer Proxy. And another thing is, you can also build a custom plugin that plugs into the kind of the request there and the response pipe, and with that you can do your logic to, I don't know, maybe your company has a guidance regarding how you call APIs. Maybe you want to check for things like do you issue the same call too frequently? Maybe you want to do for things like caching. Maybe, I don't know, whatever ideas you might have. But the cool thing is you can build plugins that represent behaviors that you want to test and add them to the tool so that it can serve specific purposes relevant to your scenarios.
Yep, absolutely. Really cool stuff. Now, on the video side, Veronique Langel had a PnP PowerShell v2. What has changed? Be careful which shell you're on. So basically, there's a new version of PnP PowerShell 2.1, actually, because of complications on the release. But it's basically version 2x version of PnP PowerShell. And she's showing out what has changed, what are the improvements and all of that. It's really cool. Thank you, Veronique, for that video. Awesome stuff. And then PnP.
Paolo?
Yeah, Paolo. PLC's Tech Bites, Paolo Pialorsi had an episode 245 handling bicep templates and GitHub Actions. So again, how can we automate all the doing DevOps, combining with GitHub Actions and then bicep templates? Actually, really cool stuff. So
Yes.
Then Shane Young had a new video related on the barcode reader
Scanning
control.
barcodes from a bottle of wine.
Yes. Well, why not? That's just an example. So, but basically there is a barcode reader control, which will then enable like more mobile scenario, just scanning those barcodes directly from mobile camera, which is really cool. So it makes things super
And
easy.
I mean, you can apply it to anything, right? Like anything from retail to invoices, scanning,
Yes.
everything that has a barcode, and for which in the past you would need to build quite complex stuff to have that, image recognition, barcode recognition. Like now it's just a thing you add to Power App and it just works. So it's minutes of work to build that ability and to attach it to a business.
Yep, absolutely. Really cool. And then April Dunham had a new blog post related on Azure AI Builder, Azure OpenAI. So basically adding the Power GPT to your Power Platform solution. That's actually pretty cool. So it's awesome that we're getting there, and more we have the APIs and integrations and opportunities available. So super cool. So thank you, April, on that one. Cool. That's it for now. Anything interesting happening this week?
Always. We are concoding, I guess that is the right word. New plan for a new thing, so stay tuned for more updates. First things first, this week there is the MVP Summit for those who attend. In a bit less than a month, there is Build, and at the same time there will be the European Collaborations Summit. So it starts coming close to the time to prep for the things that we are supposed to do in there. I still haven't booked the trip, so I need to do that first. What else is there? We're working on new things for Microsoft Graph Developer Proxy, for CLI. It's just a bunch of regular work, doing more and more things. How about you?
Yep. The prepping of the conferences is by far the number one thing, and of course MVP Summit. I'm going to be moderating a lot of the sessions virtually. So basically hanging on the line and making sure that the remotely joined people are feeling welcome as well. So I guess that's one way of saying that. So the MVP Summit is NDA conference happening this week. We talked about it when we started, and some of it will be a hybrid setup, so the people can actually join remotely as well. And there's quite a few sessions. It's also a cool way of catching up on latest what's coming across the stack, and then a lot of those announcements will be happening in Microsoft 365 conference as well, which is within 2 weeks. Actually, 2 weeks from now, there's a pre-day.
You will be going to Vegas, in Vegas.
Yeah. Yes, I'm super excited.
The sheer joy.
Exactly. It's fine. It's okay. But the Vegas as a city, no, not for me.
I mean, it's fun to be. It's something you have to see at least once in your life. But once you've been there, you're like, yeah,
exactly.
And
it's quite artificial, and but the good thing about that one is of course seeing a lot of friends and colleagues as well. So that's going to be helpful.
Well, but for that you don't even need to leave premises of the venue.
That is true.
Stay within the venue, and you don't need to get exposed to anything that's going on outside of it. If that is your thing, right? Because there are folks who love to be able to go to shows and other things. Perfectly fine if that's your thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody should be doing whatever they. Yeah, absolutely. But anyway, you should actually join if you're coming to Las Vegas. Say hi. I will be there for the whole week as well. Somewhere hiding in a closet.
Hiding in plain sight.
Yes. No, should be good. We do have 2 pre-day workshops and then quite a few sessions, and I'm also helping on a keynote for a few of the keynotes actually in there. So it should be good. Should be really good. Anyway, I guess that's it for this week. And thank you, Spence, for joining and having a great discussion. Good to catch up. Thank you, Waldek. Great to catch up. Thank you. We'll be back. We'll be back within the weeks. Yes. Cheers. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.